Good evening, everyone. So this week's Parsha is Parshas Miketz. However, because it's Hanukkah, we're going to be dedicating this class to Hanukkah. Now, as we know, the Talmud in the Gemara and Shabbos tells us about the fact that when the Hashmonaim took back the Beis Hamikdash, they only had one flask of pure oil to burn from, and a miracle occurred to burn, and they were able to light the menorah from that one flask that only had enough for one night for 8 nights. And with that, they instituted a Yom Tov, a holiday of Halav v'Hodah, of praise and thanks. Now on Shabbos, I mentioned the question about question of the Pnei Yehoshua commentary on Shabbos that asked the question as to why was there a need for this whole miracle. The law is that in their situation where they only had impure oil, you're allowed to use impure oil. You're not allowed to use impure materials, things for it. You can't be impure. You can't use impure things for a sacrifice if there's no choice. If you have a choice of using pure or impure, so you have to use the pure. But in a situation where, so if you have a choice of pure oil, impure oil, you're not allowed to use impure oil to light the menorah. But in a situation as they were in, where there is only impure oil, there is a principle called Tumo Hikra B'Tzibur. At a communal level, impurity becomes permissible to use in the menorah or in other facets of sacrifices. And therefore, in this situation where they only had impure oil, so they could have lit the first night. They had one night for pure oil. And then the rest of the nights, it's not like they couldn't light. If all they had was impure oil, they could have used the impure oil, which means there was no need for a miracle. And miracles, Hashem doesn't just do miracles for no reason. It's got to be a reason. It's got to be a reason for it. Hashem doesn't change nature unless there's a necessity for it. And in this situation, it seems like there was no necessity to have to do a miracle since impure oil under these circumstances could be used. So I want to share with you so on Shabbos we spoke about one answer to that question, and now I want to share with you another answer. And this answer comes from Rabbi Zev Leff. He's a Rav in Eretz Yisrael, and his principle is the following. We find that many times in the Torah, that the Torah tells us to give the first, right? Our first fruits, their bikurim, goes to the Kohen at the Beis Hamikdash. There is a concept of Reishis Agez, the first shearings that we have go to the Kohen. Our firstborn is sanctified. Our firstborn animal is sanctified. There is something about first that we find that the Torah puts a lot of stress on firsts. And the question is, it would seem like it's more important for the Torah to have told us to do the best than just do the first. And the way Rabbi Leff explains it is because we have to understand that whatever we do as a first is actually a foundation for the future. It's not just like the first just happens to be the first. The first, in many facets, is really the foundation for something in the future. And anytime you, let's say, you build a building, the foundation has to be absolutely perfect. A hairline crack in a foundation can actually cause terrible damage in the future. That crack at a different floor, at a different level, wouldn't necessarily be as dangerous as by the foundation. The foundation has to be complete. It has to be strong. It has to be holy. And then everything that's built upon that is now going to have the firm foundation of purity, of holiness. And the first, whenever we are approaching something that is a first, we have to see it as the foundation that we're going to build upon. And he gives a couple of examples of this. One example comes from a famous story about a sage of the times of the Mishnah. Name was Elisha ben Avuya. Elisha ben Avuya was the teacher, the Rebbe of Rabbi Meir, the great sage of the Mishnah, Rabbi Meir. And eventually he became so evil that he became referred to as Acher, which means the other guy. They wouldn't even mention his name. That is how evil, how wicked he became. And there is a source in the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, that actually, let's call it, blames what eventually came out of Elisha ben Avuya to his father. Because Elisha, the son of Avuya, was a seemingly very prominent person. And when Elisha was born and he made the bris, he invited many people to the bris. And some of those people who came to the bris were great scholars. Now, as things were, people were waiting around for things to happen, these scholars began to study Torah. And they became so involved in Torah study that a fire came down from heaven and surrounded them. And when Avuya saw that, he was like, what are you trying to do? Burn down my house? And it was explained to him that this was a heavenly fire that descended upon these sages because of their Torah study. When Avuya saw that, he said, if this is what Torah can do, I dedicate my son to the study of Torah. So does that sound problematic to you? So the Talmud says there was something at fault in that. And that was the fault that in the foundation of Elisha ben Avuya created a fault that eventually made him susceptible to all the evils that he succumbed to. Now, this would probably need a lot more explanation than we're going to give it. But what went wrong? What did he do wrong? I mean, he saw the greatness of Torah. He saw the fire descend, and he said, wow, this is Torah. I want to dedicate my son. So the explanation that's given is that at the end of the day, we know there's such a thing as Torah lishma, Torah for its own sake. And then there's studying Torah for even personal gain, for honor. And we're told, mitoch shaloi lishma ba lishma. You start with the shaloi lishma, you start with the ulterior motives, but as you go on and you develop, you become sincere. Excuse me. You become sincere. So in the case, so in essence, the act of Avuya, of being like wowed by this fire, and because of that, dedicating his son to Torah, was actually not sincere. It was not so sincere. It was more like something that, it wowed him, it shocked him, it impressed him. And because of that, he devoted his son to Torah study. So the problem is, say the commentaries, is that when he devoted his son for Torah study, the intentions were insincere. But the question is, I just mentioned, we have a rule. Insincere, it's not like you're forbidden to study Torah in an insincere manner. Because, as we said, from starting off insincere, you could develop to become sincere. So what was wrong with the fact, what was so bad about the fact that Avuya dedicated his son in under these circumstances, with these intentions? But the answer, Rabbi Lev explains, is that it was a crack in the foundation. It was starting off the foundation in not the right way. Here was his son. His son was getting his bris. He was entering into the covenant of Avraham Avinu. This was his beginning. And this beginning needed to be perfect, rock solid. And because there was this small flaw, but it was a flaw at the beginning, a flaw at the foundation, it doesn't mean that Elisha ben Avuya didn't have a choice. Of course he had a choice. He had free will. But he already was at a disadvantage. He was already at a point of weakness, an inherent weakness, because of the fact that his start was not on a complete and solid level. It's a mind-boggling idea.
But how about converted? He doesn't have any base.
He's starting right. He's starting bright new. Person who converts, is the Talmud says, kakatan shanola dami. It's like a child being born. He's starting with a clean slate.
There is no father.
Nope. Not from a halakhic point. Not from a Jewish point. Now, doesn't mean that there's no biological connection. But the point is, from a point of how he's viewed as a Jew, there's no connection to his past. Now, Rabbi Lev gives another example of this. Another example. We've mentioned this before. The Talmud says there was a sage named Reb Chia. And Reb Chia was credited with making sure that Torah should not be forgotten from the Jewish people. There was a point of time where there were no established schools. And basically, if your father taught you Torah, you learned Torah. If he didn't teach you Torah, you didn't have Torah. And that system was not working. So Reb Chia used to go from town to town, and he would teach children Torah, and that would keep that, and that's what kept Torah continuing. That's how these children remained Torah educated. Now, what did he do? The Talmud says. It says that he used to go and catch deer. He would skin the deer after catching it, give its meat to poor people. He would then go ahead and work out the skins into becoming parchment, and then on the parchment he would make 5 scrolls of Chumash, Bereishis, Shema, Devarim, 5 books of the Torah. 6 other scrolls were the 6 orders of Mishnah. He would bring these scrolls to a town, and in the town he would take 11 children, and he would teach each 5 of them, each one a book of the Torah, a book of the Chumash. And to the other children, he would teach 1 book of the Mishnah, and then they were to teach each other, and any other children that would be there. And he did this going from town to town. This was the process that he did from town to town. And because of that, Torah did not become forgotten from the Jewish people. So the question is asked is that why did he need to have to go ahead and start everything from scratch? Go buy a couple of Chamashim, go buy a couple of Mishnayos. He didn't have to be the one to make it. Go to somebody, go to a scribe, get these things, and then bring it and teach. But no, he skinned it, and the meat went to the poor, and he had to take care of everything. Why? The answer is because he knew that when he would be every step of creating these books, creating these scrolls, his intentions, his holy intentions of using this to teach these children Torah, intentions that he clearly was very strong about. You go to the bookstore and you buy a scroll, it's business. Here, he was creating them with the intention of teaching these children Torah. And what he used was, and even what the animal that was used to make these books, it went ahead and the meat was given to the poor. He understood that if he makes these books with his intentions, there'll be a lot of power to these books. The impression made on these children studying Torah from these books, from these scrolls, would be much greater than if it just came from somebody selling these things for a business.
But this is a real story?
Yeah, Gemara brings it down. This explanation why he went through it all, but as Gemara says, this is what he did. The explanation behind it is because, again, he knew that if he makes the books, if they're created, if they start in a strong, in a holy way, they have more power to them. They have more spiritual energy to them. And that'll make a difference to the children. So now he applies this, Rabbi Leff applies this idea to our question. We had a question, why did Hashem have to make this miracle that the pure oil should burn for 8 nights? They could have burned, if they had oil for 1 night, use that oil, and then you can use oil that's impure. So Rabbi Leff explains, because right now the Jewish people were starting over. What they were doing right now, when they took the Beis Hamikdash and they had to purify it, it's called one of the explanations to the name Hanukkah comes from the word chinuch, which means to dedicate. They had to rededicate the Beis Hamikdash. Beis Hamikdash had been turned into a place of, I don't know what the Greeks did with it, but it wasn't a Beis Hamikdash anymore. Everything was impure. The Talmud says they had to rebuild parts of it. They had to rebuild the utensils. Everything had to start anew. Well, if everything has to start anew, then you want it to start in the best way. You want to know, can you use the impure oil? Yes, you may. But what's the better way to go? Clearly, the better way to go is the pure oil. The pure oil is pure. Its effects, its energy is different. And therefore, now again, they had to wait a couple of days to be able to produce the pure oil. So the question was, we don't need a miracle, just use the impure oil. The answer is Hashem made a miracle because since was the new beginning, the new start, Hashem wanted it to be perfect, wanted it to be complete, wanted it to be impaired. Because since now it was starting over again, it was the beginning, this is the foundation upon everything else is built on it, and that makes a difference from everything else that comes after that.
This idea, I like this idea. It's like it can be explained why Yaakov want to buy his firstborn.
Perhaps. But getting back to something else, so that's
basement without crack.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, could be. It's a nice idea. Okay, so that's the first item for tonight about Hanukkah. The next thing I want to bring out is the following. So I mentioned that the Talmud says, Lashana Acheres, the year after, Kava'um V'Asa'um, they established them and made them, meaning these 8 days where the miracle took place. Yomim Tovim, holidays. Yom Tov means holidays. Bahala V'Hodah, with praise and thanks. Okay, now it's very interesting that the Talmud calls these days of Hanukkah Yomim Tovim, right? Like Yom Tov. Now we know that Hanukkah is not like a regular Yom Tov. A regular Yom Tov, right, is like Shabbos in many ways, right? The things we're not allowed to do, just like on Shabbos. Hanukkah, there are no restrictions about, there are no Shabbos or Yom Tov typical restrictions of what we're allowed to do on Hanukkah. So there's clearly a point here that although it's called Yomim Tovim, it's not a full-fledged Yom Tov. But here, let me ask you a question. So it says that they were made for Yom Tovim, for Halavodah, to give praise and thanks. Okay. Now, everybody has a Hanukkah party on Hanukkah, right? Right? Now, we know that on Purim, we have an obligation to have a Suda, right? We have a Purim Suda, right? We're supposed to wash, and we're supposed to eat. Drink. The drink is a separate part, but or an additional part, the level of drinking. But we have an obligation to have a Suda, to have a meal, like on Shabbos, like on Yom Tov. Do we have that obligation on Hanukkah? Never heard, right? So there's actually 3 opinions. There are 3 opinions. There's an opinion that says, yes, there is. Yes, there is. And the basis to say that is because, number one, the Gemara calls it Yomim Tovim. So even though it calls it a Yom Tov, calls it a holiday. Now, although we know it's not a full-fledged holiday, but calling it a holiday, so we know that it doesn't include, the prohibitions of activity. But if you call it a Yom Tov, it should include having a meal like a Yom Tov. When Maimonides talks about, the Hanukkah story, and he talks about also how after the miracle they established it as a holiday, he calls it Yemei Simcha. I think he calls it Yemei Simcha. He for sure calls it Yemei Simcha V'Halo, which means days of joy and giving praise. The word Simcha is a very specific, as typically means, on Yom Tov, there's a mitzvah called Simchas Yom Tov, rejoicing on Yom Tov, which means having a meal in honor of Yom Tov. So if the Rambam calls Hanukkah Yemei Simcha, days of joy, that word, the connotation of that word, the implication of that word typically is you should have a suda, you're supposed to have a festive meal. So there's one opinion that says festive meal. You have an obligation. There's another opinion that says no obligation whatsoever. Doesn't exist. The sages never instituted any kind of su'uda, any kind of obligation or mitzvah of su'uda, of having a festive meal on Hanukkah. So therefore the question is asked, but wait a minute, Purim, we have a su'uda, right? That's for sure. Now, of the 2 rabbinic holidays that we have is Hanukkah and Purim. Purim, the sages instituted there should be a festive meal. Hanukkah, we're saying not. Why? We were saved on Hanukkah, right? We were saved. Why shouldn't there be a festive meal?
In both cases, to be saved.
Right? So what's the difference? So one answer that's given, that's the famous answer that's given, is because you have to look at the nature of the danger that we faced by each holiday. In Purim, the threat, the danger was physical destruction. On Purim, if a Jew wanted to become a Persian, it didn't help. Haman wanted you dead, just like Hitler. Didn't make a difference. You're a Jew, you're done. And therefore, since we were physically saved, when we celebrate our salvation, we celebrate it physically. Since we were threatened physically, we celebrate physically. Eating. On Hanukkah, the danger was not physical. If you became a Greek, you were fine. Like if you become a communist, you're okay, you're fine. You know? So you were fine. There was no physical threat. Now, it's true that Jews who, after the decrees about not keeping Torah, kept the Torah anyway, they lost their lives. But there was no physical threat. It was a spiritual threat. It was a threat to the Jewish people as Jews. It was a spiritual threat, not a physical threat. And therefore, because we were saved in a spiritual manner from spiritual destruction, therefore, when we celebrate in a spiritual way, which is by giving thanks to Hashem, by giving praise to Hashem. Basically, on the nature of the danger, that's how you celebrate, to remember what we were saved from. But I'll tell you another answer that I just recently heard. It's an interesting answer. So, I'm going to ask you this question. It seems like a very interesting. It's an interesting kind of question to deal with. So on Purim, right? Haman got a decree against the Jewish people, and then eventually there was a war where the Jews defeated Haman and his people, and the Jewish people were saved. Did any Jews die? There's no indication that anybody died. Beforehand, there was nobody was killed beforehand. The decree was, on the 13th of Adar, the Jews can be wiped out. But until then, there's no record. There's no record of anything happening to anybody.
Megillah doesn't say.
There's no mentioning of that, right? Did anybody die in the war? Doesn't say.
Probably yes.
But there's some seems to be, according to some commentaries, no. There's no indication that anybody died in the Purim story. Hanukkah, we know people for sure died. That we know. Again, meaning I don't know if there's any indication at the war with the Hashmonaim that they fought, to free the Beis Hamikdash if anybody died. One thing for sure we know, the wars after Hanukkah, people for sure died.
But there were several years.
But there were several years. And during those years, right, you had people who died because they wanted, even when you had the decree against Torah, mitzvahs, people kept it, and they died for it. So I one time heard there was a commentary from an early commentary that he asked the question, what's the difference between Hanukkah and Purim? Hanukkah doesn't have a meal, Purim does. The answer is, Purim has a festive meal because nobody died. But since by Hanukkah, people did lose their lives, therefore, it's kind of toned down. You don't have that full celebration. Basically, out of respect for those people who gave up their lives. Very interesting idea. That Hanukkah, Hanukkah wasn't instituted in a way that they should celebrate, so to speak, have a joyous physical celebration, a meal and stuff, because people died. And because people died, they decided, out of respect to that, out of respect to them, and out of the grief of the families, and we're going to keep it just on a spiritual level of giving thanks to Hashem. Interesting idea. You have time?
But still, we still have some celebration.
Yeah, but those are voluntary. That's not an obligation. It's not an obligation. It's things that we do. We do a little something, but it's not like a full-fledged meal with everything. We do things. Now, what's interesting is to note.
There is no time in your.
No, not when I'm recording.
But this is cell phone, I don't know.
Still got a few minutes. When I'm recording, that you can't. There's no time.
There's no time.
Now, okay. Now, but there's a third opinion, which you just touched on. The third opinion is that there's no obligation to have a meal. But if you have a meal, and during this meal, you sing songs of praise and thanks to Hashem, you've now turned the meal into a mitzvah. Meaning you don't have to have this meal. But if you take the meal, if you make a meal, and in the meal you sing songs of praise to Hashem for the Hanukkah miracle, then the meal becomes a mitzvah to partake from. Now your meal turns into a mitzvah.
What mitzvah?
It's a mitzvah. It's something that you should partake. It becomes something to partake from as a fulfillment of Hashem's will.
But it's not part of the sixth one. What's this calendar mitzvahs?
No. It's considered a proper thing to do.
Okay.
It's a proper thing to do. You get credit for it. Okay. Now the fact that on Hanukkah there is this idea of basically, you don't have to do it, but you'll take a meal and you'll turn it into a mitzvah. That's very apropos for Hanukkah, because the Greeks, what they wanted to do, the Greeks were very into science and beauty, and there's a lot that we have from them. But they felt that man is subservient to the physical aspect of life, right? There's nothing beyond physical. And the Torah is full of concepts that do not conform with the physical world. So one for instance, which is something that they decreed against the Greeks, and that was that Rosh Chodesh. Essentially, how was Rosh Chodesh supposed to be? How is the beginning of the month supposed to be established? Witnesses are supposed to come and say. Now, let's say it's cloudy, and the witnesses couldn't see anything. When does Rosh Chodesh start? The next day.
Not in any case, start next day.
Well, not in any case, because now that we have a calendar, we work with an established calendar. And it's not like they didn't know scientifically when the new moon is coming. They could figure it out. But the Torah says we don't follow that. We work with it, but we're not subservient to it. Because you have to have witnesses coming to the basin to declare the new month. And if they didn't see it, even if you know the new moon is already present, you just couldn't see it. Nonetheless, Rosh Chodesh starts the next day. The Greeks couldn't handle that. What are you talking about? Then if the month begins by the new moon, so when you know the new moon is there, that's when you start. Physically, scientifically, it's there. That's where you start. But that's not how the Torah works, because the Torah isn't subservient to the physical world. The physical world is subservient to the Torah. And that's something they couldn't handle. And that was their war against the Torah. The Greek gods, right? The famous Greek gods, right, are all superhuman beings with superhuman flaws. They all have problems. They're fighting with each other. They're killing each other. They're doing sinful things. In the minds of the Greeks, their gods were just humans that were limited by physicality. This and that, and the Torah doesn't work like that. The Torah elevates a person with physicality. We work beyond physicality. And that was their war against the Jewish people. When they went ahead and so therefore, if on Hanukkah, what we do is we say, take the meal, take a regular meal. It's no one made you an obligation. No one said there's a mitzvah to eat this meal, but take the meal and turn it into a mitzvah. That's what we believe in. We believe in taking the physical and elevating it, making it to a mitzvah, making it greater than just being something physical. That was the war against the Greeks fought against the Torah. That was our salvation. And it's very apropos to remember that by turning our regular meals into a mitzvah to partake of. Have a wonderful Hanukkah. Thank you for listening.
But this is
Thank you for listening.
celebration. Is it like custom to any kind of